I have this thought, and it's probably super arrogant, but I was just thinking, like, I don't understand why every single conversation I've had with people who are in favor of the war in Ukraine literally know nothing about it.
You say I know nothing about it. You were able to say, well, here's these minute details, these trivial details. Oh, you can't explain this period of history in complete detail? Oh, you must know nothing about it.
The cause of it?
Right?
We don't know the cause of the war.
The cause of the war
Can I explain what's happening right
is,
here?
again, Putin. And
see,
again,
this is what's
Putin
happening.
These
are the dogmatic talking points. This is what happens, right?
But it's just
when we
You're trying to
when we have a
conversation, and it's
talking about
not true.
talking about the cause of the war is not obfuscation. What's happening here is that you have a list of like pre-programmed dogmatic talking points that you've been giving out this whole time, right? Putin is not justified. He's invading. Look what's happening. He's not justified. Whenever I bring up anything in history that Ukraine's doing, it's always, well, that's a distraction. That's not justifying this. That's not justifying this. That's not
All
justifying
you've been
this.
saying is Yakovlevich,
what I'm saying.
you say over and over.
What I'm saying is that when you look at the history of the conflict, when you look at the causes of the conflict, that's relevant when we're deciding who to support with our money. I'm not saying support Russia with U.S. dollars. I'm not saying do that. I'm saying that we should be a little bit choosy with which wars we're funding. We should be a little bit choosy with where we're sending billions of dollars, and if we're sending, and so when
and so does most of Americans.
I know you choose that. I'm arguing that we shouldn't.
46.
That's not most. That's a plurality.
Plurality of Americans.
Regardless,
46% of Americans think that, and again, in a recent
that can
poll
be true
in March. Let me finish. Right, have decided. Right, they want to send more aid to Ukraine. They think that we aren't sending enough aid. And talking about dogmatic talking points, right? You continue to bring up these things that do not matter when it comes down to it. They do not. You keep saying that.
Matter.
You repeat it as if you're on.
Okay,
why doesn't the cause matter?
Let me ask you a question.
This is like Japan in 1945 saying, oh, the Americans are invading us. And then we say, well, what about Pearl Harbor? Oh, that doesn't matter. That's history. Who cares?
Right. Okay. So why is Vladimir Putin taking this specific region of Ukraine? We have the battle map pulled up.
This specific, the ones he wants to take all of Ukraine, I would say. Again, his stated goals at the start of the war were demilitarization and denazification, and you can't do either of those if you don't control at least a major portion of Ukraine. The region, the Donbas region, right? This is what he has been since 2014, since Crimea, sending in his little green men to stir up these and to fund these kind of separatist groups and to help them and to kind of stir up this conflict so he can, quote unquote, justify him coming back in. That's why he's trying to take those regions. That's his, quote unquote, justification. But again,
can you name the oblasts that he seized?
Luhansk and Donbas? And Donbas?
No.
Zaporizhia, he has some...
Zaporizhia, Kherson, Donetsk and Luhansk, and then Crimea.
Sure. Okay.
I think it might be interesting to kind of put the election map from 2010 compared to the current occupation map. I think that's something that could be useful, right? One of the reasons why... and with Crimea, the reason, obviously, the Russians were able to take it so quickly was because the population there was in support of Russia. But one of the reasons, again, why they managed to make such great strides in the areas that they currently hold is because the population is not vehemently anti-Russian. And there's polls that show this. And this idea there's this idea that the separatist movement in the Donbas was just, this entirely engineered thing. It's just not true. There are people there who were upset, again, because they voted for this guy that was removed.
But again, do you deny that Russia has exacerbated whatever natural enmity might exist there, that Russia has used its power, influence, and military to exacerbate, to fund to funnel funds and men into these things? That's true.
I have no doubt that the Russian government has helped the separatists in the east and in Crimea in the same way that I have no doubt the Spanish and the French helped the U.S. during our War of Independence.
These are not analogous. The Spanish and the French did not take a state for themselves.
If the state voted to join them. This is the thing that's very it's confusing, right? Self-determination includes a country voting to join another country.
Self-determination doesn't count when you have guns pointing at your head.
So when the Russians
what
intervened
happened
in
in
no, that's not
2014.
what happened. When the Russians intervened in Crimea, they weren't going and pointing the guns at the population that supported them's heads. They supported them both before, during, and after this whole incident.
Why don't they have an election? Why doesn't Ukraine vote on new leadership?
Well, first of all, it's unconstitutional. They have a
What does the Constitution of Ukraine say about having an election?
so under martial law, they are not allowed to have elections. And
Who declares martial law?
The president of the
The Constitution of Ukraine leaves out the president when it comes to who the elections are suspended for during martial law. It's
Oh,
a
wait.
statute.
The president declared martial law.
Yeah.
He could undeclare it.
Yes, but he is in a state. The country's being invaded. Of course, he's in a state of emergency. Martial law
They
is
shouldn't
very
have
important.
elections.
No, I don't think they should have elections now. I think it would disenfranchise millions of Ukrainians. I think that the people who are under occupied areas in Russia wouldn't have their voices heard.
Do you think that Zelensky should abide strictly by the Constitution, or should he use extreme measures to secure victory?
It really depends on the context. I can imagine situations where he probably should violate if it was
Let me ask you this.
distance,
So-
right? And he knew he's going to lose the whole country unless he violated one section of the Constitution. It would depend. I would need a specific example.
Let's try this. So right now, there's heavy conflict in their northern oblasts. Kharkiv, for instance, is the Ukrainian front on the Russian border. If the government of Kharkiv had, let's say, 40% of their of the local government was in favor of seceding to join Russia, should he go in and remove them from power by force?
In Kharkiv,
Yeah.
that's a good question. I think that
Growing
yes, at this point.
growing sentiment is rising. Like hypothetically, growing sentiment is rising among the local population that they should actually join the fight with Russia against Kiev.
Yes,
should
I think that
Zelensky
they
send the
have
military in and arrest those politicians?
I think that they have a duty to the state and to the security of the state to go in and to stop that. I do believe that they have a duty to the state and the security of the state to go in and stop that from happening.
So in this context, if the people of these areas try to make self-determination independently through their own local government, you're saying he should stop that political process.
yes, I don't think that.
So they have no right to vote on how they should exist.
I don't think that right supersedes the right for the state itself to protect itself from an ongoing invasion.
That's why I said it's
If
a
we were in
political
situation-
process.
If
I'm
we were in
saying
I
a political
understand.
process by which the local elected leaders say, guys,
But the
we
political,
think we should actually side with Russia at this
the
point.
political process is existing in the context of an ongoing invasion by a foreign hostile power, and we can't ignore that.
So your point. So my question then is, you are saying there is no context in Ukraine right now where anyone has a democratic voice.
That's not true at all. That's not
So
what I'm saying
okay,
at all.
that's why I asked specifically about a minority group in Kharkiv voting through the natural political process against the interests of Kiev, and you said Zelensky should use military force to arrest
No.
those people.
Not just against the interests of Kiev, but also joining the enemy that is currently invading them.
Right.
They are becoming enemy combatants in that case.
Right. So what about to separate? Not to join the fight, but to separate
To
from Kiev?
separate, then that's a harder question, right? But again, under the context of a current invasion, I don't think it's okay for country or for a portion of a country to try to secede during an invasion. So, like for example, if America was being invaded, if Canada rose up for some reason, right, and was coming in through the borders, I don't think that it would be okay. I don't think it would be morally justified for Georgia to try to secede from the Union because there were.
Well, this is a border state, which is why I use the example. So it'd be more like Oregon or Washington.
Sure, yeah,
Washington's
I don't think
a better
that's.
example.
I don't think that. I don't think that that's.
do you think that-
morally, that I don't think that the United States should allow that to happen. No.
Do you think Zelensky should suspend legal jurisprudence, considering that war? Should he be able to detain and arrest anybody?
No.
So if there is an individual there who's, say, a journalist, should he be able to just rendition that person, or should they?
There should have some. There should be some justification. They should be able to show that they've committed some crime. There should be a legal process.
But like a normal legal process, adversarial court, like we know it. Or are you saying, like, at the very least, have a writ from a judge saying he's a bad guy?
It would depend on the situation, right?
So depending on the situation means there would be a scenario then where the normal judicial process doesn't play out.
Well, for example,
Because you're either saying absolutely not, there will always be standard habeas corpus, and legal justifications through an adversarial court. If you say there are some it depends. You're saying sometimes maybe he should just grab somebody and lock them up.
In extremis. So like if, for example, there was a journalist and you knew, right? You found information that this journalist had a nuclear weapon that he was about to detonate. I don't think you go to trial. I think you take them out.
But you're not talking about a journalist, you're talking about a terrorist or an insurgent or an enemy combatant. A journalist, you're not going to call a journalist unless their job is literally just dissemination of information.
So dissemination of information, then in that case, if that's all they're doing,
what if there was
it should be a legal process?
What about a foreign journalist operating?
Are you talking about Coach Red Pill? Is this what we're leading to here?
One of the things we're getting to is the execution of Gonzalo Lira, yes.
Execution.
Yeah, I can talk about that.
He was murdered by the state. He was trying to flee the state.
Can you prove that?
Yes, he posted a video at the border, and then he was kidnapped and reported dead.
He also
dead by what
claimed
causes?
He also claimed to be
just real quick.
tortured.
Dead by what causes?
Before this.
Improper treatment, malnutrition, and dehydration.
Improper treatment, malnutrition, and dehydration. So
Presumptive
pneumonia,
reasons when you lock them in a jail and don't give them medical treatment when they're trying to flee your country.
Right. So
how was he arrested?
How was he arrested?
Why was he arrested?
Why was he arrested?
Yeah, he was fleeing the country.
He was disseminating information, as far as I know, right? And I'd have to look into the case again.
Are you in favor of that?
No, I don't think he should have been.
Arrested and killed.
Well, first of all, there was no evidence he was killed.
I mean, if you take someone by force,
who killed him?
The state.
The state killed him.
Yes, by locking him up
he
and
died of pneumonia in prison.
Indeed, yes. So you think in the United States,
if someone dies of pneumonia in prison, did we execute that prisoner?
We are responsible for their deaths. If someone is not guilty of a crime, is fleeing, and we take them and we put them in prison.
How do we know he's not guilty of a crime?
What was he put in prison for?
He was putting in prison for disinformation, disseminating.
I can tell you exactly.
Which I believe was a crime. Sure. But again, I'm against that. I think people should have the ability to have free speech. But to act as if the Ukrainian people don't get a say on their own laws, I think is silly.
Well, that's why I asked you about Kharkiv. And you said they should arrest politicians who are against their will.
No, again, in the context of them joining an enemy state that is actively invading their country, you keep leaving out these contexts and doing this funny little trick where you'll set up a hypothetical. Yes, set up a hypothetical under certain circumstances, and then you will change the circumstances, and you'll say, "Oh, look, you said yes to this, so it must be yes to that."
All the comparison.
That's again,
or it's literally called me asking you to find the degree by which you are accepting of certain degrees of power.
Sure.
So if you say Zelensky should abide by the Constitution, I will then ask you, okay, should we have elections? Then you say, right. So the issue then when I say, should there be standard habeas corpus? And you say, it depends. That would literally imply sometimes there should not be.
Yes.
Yes, I'm asking you these questions to find the line by which you would say the line has been crossed, not to set up, as you described it, funny little hypotheticals.
Well,
so I'm asking you,
then why,
when we talked about Crimea had an election and you didn't respect it. So I ask you, what if Kharkiv was going to side with Russia?
The Crimea had an election under gunpoint, and the UN doesn't respect
which is
that.
Why
the international law doesn't
respect that. Hypothetical. Which is why I asked a hypothetical. So if that's clearly a red line for you, let's try another scenario. Would this be a red line for you? And you said in this circumstance, yes. In that circumstance, no. Simple answer.
Sure.
There's no conflict. That's why I asked.
Again,
what is the line by which you think the political process is a threat to Kiev? If the people choose, if the people in a oblast decide amongst themselves Russia is correct, you think that Zelensky should send in military to remove those politicians. And that's a fine position to have. I disagree. I think, and you said it's because it's an invasive force on your country, but where does self-determination come in?
There are plenty of instances where we wouldn't let people self-determine. I'll give you an example.
The reason why I asked.
I'll give you an example, right? Just to explain. So if I saw someone on a roof who was about to jump, I wouldn't let them self-determination themselves to jump. I would physically stop them. I would grab them and stop them from doing that.
Now, the reason why I asked is because in the instance of Crimea, the people of Crimea overwhelmingly voted to join Russia. But your argument is it's fake. Russia was occupying the region, so it doesn't count.
Yes.
I then asked you, what about a legitimate election? And you still said the state should use military force from stopping those people from having that vote.
Because in Crimea, they weren't under invasion from Russia.
No.
But in this other situation, they were. And my answer was in the context.
You're missing the point.
I think you're missing my answer.
No, you're not answering what I'm asking you.
Absolutely answering the question.
The point that was brought up is this. Crimea's election does not count because they're under duress.
Yes.
We agree.
Yes.
I asked you about what if another oblast had a legitimate election, and you said no, which means even in the instance where Crimea was choosing to join Russia, you would not accept it.
Because these legitimate, as you said, this you sneak it in, right? But again, they are also under duress because there is a foreign military power actively
Agreed.
engaging.
And understood. Now let me try to explain what I'm saying. Your argument then is it doesn't matter if Crimea is under duress. An oppressive force is seeking to take over Ukraine. We will not let Crimea secede.
If Russia was currently invading the Donbas and Crimea tried to secede, let's say the Crimea referendum never happened and Crimea was part of Ukraine in 2022 when they came in and Russia invaded the Donbas. And Crimea at that point tried to secede. Yes, I would also say that that's not okay. But in other situations where... Again,
the reason for asking
the point. You're missing mine.
The reason why I asked you this, because your point doesn't matter to why I'm asking you a question. You can assert some point after the fact. My point is we are trying to understand your position on Crimea versus any other political process. You have asserted that the Crimean election is not legitimate because they were under occupation. Agreed. What if there was an oblast not under occupation? You still think they should not be allowed to secede. In fact, when Crimea did get absorbed by Russia, the Donbas was already in conflict with Russian troops in the eastern region of Luhansk and Donetsk. Russia was already actively in this conflict, though it wasn't a hardcore invasion. The country was still considered in a civil war when this broke out. After Trump's election, this simmered down and they stopped referring it to as a civil war, but a separatist movement, despite the fact Crimea had already been absorbed. Your argument is inconsistent.
I'd have
no problem with you saying, I don't care what Crimea wants. They don't get to vote for secession. And I'd say, okay, if you made the argument that I don't care what Ukraine does, the U.S. shall prevail, I'd understand your position. But you keep trying to create moral justifications for why this instance is right and that instance is wrong. I think your better argument would be literally nothing matters, all is fair in love and war, and we're going to crush Russia. And I'd say, okay.
Here's the deal, right? Again, when you gave me the hypothetical of Kharkiv, right? And I said, no, because this legitimate process, because... and this is a context I think you were ignoring, and I think that makes me not inconsistent here, is that there is a form of duress, an extreme form of duress, and they're actively being invaded by the group that Kharkiv wants to secede to. If you were in
Which is what Crimea did, right?
No. What Crimea did was they were invaded by Russia. Russia locked their parliament, right? And they had guns.
When did Russia invade Crimea?
When did Russia invade Crimea? The 22nd, maybe the 23rd. There is.
Did Russia have any military in Crimea before then?
Yes, they had a base and they were leasing.
Was the base significant?
Define significant.
I mean, are you talking about like 10 troops? Or are you talking about 1 million?
Neither of those.
If the U.S.
and Russia again,
if the U.S. built a port in Taiwan and staged their entire Pacific Fleet there with all their flagships and 30,000 personnel, would we call that an occupation?
Did Taiwan invite us?
Yeah. And we've been there. So let's say we have 30,000 people in Taiwan. Our flagship for our entire Pacific Fleet is there. All of our warships are based out of there. And then we send in, a few thousand more troops. We would call that an invasion?
Of course not.
So what you're saying is that Sevastopol was occupied by Russia the whole time and wasn't invaded because they already had their Black Sea Fleet flagship there. So it was their most significant port. In fact, their only warm water port.
During the Crimean referendum, Russian troops blockaded Ukrainian bases that were located in Crimea, so they couldn't stop them.
My point was this. Crimea already housed thousands or tens of thousands of Russian personnel, naval personnel. It didn't just have some ships. It wasn't just a base. It was the base. It is the home of their Black Sea Fleet. It is where their flagship makes port. It is their only warm water access. This was not insignificant for Russia. Russia didn't need to invade. They were already there. So the question about elections becomes, if you believe that Crimea was under duress, and then I ask you about another region not under duress, but your position is if they are going to be joining an adversarial force that is actively in conflict with them, we would not allow it. It would not have mattered what the results of either election is. It doesn't matter if Crimea is under duress or not. I don't know why you can't just say that. It's a simple answer. Crimea can't secede because we won't let them, just like in 1991. We didn't let them then. We're not going to let them now. End of story. Determination doesn't matter. There's no problem saying it. Abraham Lincoln didn't let the South make self-determination. So it's a simple argument. That's what I'm trying to understand. I don't see a cohesive moral worldview in the argument.